The first time John Williams laid eyes on her, he didn't know that she would change his life forever. In the quiet expanse of his luxurious mansion, surrounded by wealth and endless distractions, he had grown used to the emptiness that came with it. Success had brought him riches, but it had taken from him his ability to trust. His friends were fake, his family distant, and his relationships a series of broken promises and betrayals. But then, Grace Thomas walked into his life. She wasn't what he expected. In fact, she was everything he hadn't realized he was looking for. The kitchen was where she came alive. For the first time in years, John found himself looking forward to the end of his long, lonely workdays. He wasn't just coming home for dinner anymore, he was coming home to Grace. She was beautiful in a way that didn't scream for attention. Her beauty was in the way she moved, the way she spoke, in the warmth of her smile that seemed to brighten the very walls of the house. And though she was humble and quiet, there was something in her eyes, a flicker of something darker, that made him curious. What he didn't know, as he watched her arrange his dinner with such meticulous care, was that beneath the surface of this gentle woman lay a dangerous secret. A secret that, if exposed, would ruin them both. Grace Thomas was a master of deception. Her innocent exterior hid a mind as sharp as a blade, one that had led her down a path John would never expect, the path of a kidnapper. But she wasn't just any criminal, she was the mastermind behind a network of abductions that targeted the very wealthy men she charmed into her life. John had no idea. All he knew was that he had never felt so at ease with anyone in his life. The trust he had so carefully built around him, layered thick after years of betrayal, was slowly unraveling. He had begun to believe that maybe, just maybe, Grace was different. But he was wrong. And when the truth came crashing down, it would be more than either of them could bear. As the weeks passed, John found himself drawn deeper into Grace's world. It was easy to be captivated by her quiet intelligence, the way she listened without judgment, and her ability to make him feel as though, for once, someone truly understood him. Her soft laughter became the soundtrack to his evenings, and before he knew it, she had become an irreplaceable part of his life. But even as their bond grew, so did the nagging sense that something wasn't quite right. John tried to ignore it, the way Grace seemed to vanish every few days, disappearing into the night without a word, as though she had another life, another purpose. Or how sometimes, when he would ask her about her past, her gaze would turn distant, as though she were hiding a memory too painful to relive. At night, after the lavish parties and endless meetings with business associates, John would sit in the dark, contemplating. He had been betrayed too many times to count, but the feeling Grace gave him was different. She made him feel safe. Trusting her felt like opening a door to a world he had long shut out. But could he truly trust her? John pushed the doubts aside. She's just a cook, he thought. She's kind. She's here, she's loyal. He convinced himself that his unease was nothing more than the leftover scars of past betrayals, nothing more than a reflex he couldn't seem to shake. One evening, after dinner, Grace stayed behind to clean up while John retreated to his study. The lights were dim, casting shadows across the sleek modern furniture. John was seated at his desk, staring at a pile of paperwork that seemed to blur in front of his eyes. He wasn't thinking about work, his mind kept returning to Grace. What was her story? The faint sound of Grace humming reached him from the kitchen. He rose from his desk, his feet carrying him to the door without him even thinking. She was always humming when she worked, a soft tune that brought an odd sense of peace. He leaned against the doorframe, watching her as she chopped vegetables with careful precision. "Grace," he called softly, and she paused, glancing over her shoulder with that familiar, warm smile. "Yes, sir?" John hesitated. The question had been on his mind for weeks, but now, with the loneliness that filled his heart again, it felt urgent. "Where do you go when you leave?" Her smile faltered, just for a second, before she straightened, turning back to her work. "Nowhere in particular. I just take a walk sometimes. I enjoy the quiet." Her voice was light, but something in it made John think she was hiding more. But before he could press further, a sharp knock interrupted their quiet moment. The doorbell rang, slicing through the silence like a blade. Grace turned toward him, her expression unreadable. "I'll get it." John watched her move toward the door, the gentle sway of her hips graceful as always, her movements fluid and calm. He felt an unsettling pang in his chest, the kind that told him something was about to change, something he couldn't control. When Grace opened the door, a man stepped into the foyer, his face stern, his suit crisp and tailored. John could tell he wasn't a regular visitor. He could feel the tension in the air, even before the man spoke. "Is Mr. Williams here?" the man asked, his voice low and formal. Grace's smile didn't waver, but there was something about the way she greeted him, too formal, too practiced, that made John uneasy. "I'll let him know you're here," Grace said, stepping aside to allow the man to enter. John stood frozen in the doorway, watching the exchange, his instincts on high alert. Something was off. He couldn't explain it, but he could feel it deep in his gut. The man's presence felt like an intrusion, a reminder that he was once again surrounded by people he couldn't trust. As the man entered the study, Grace disappeared into the hallway, her footsteps quiet as she retreated to the kitchen. John greeted the stranger with a stiff handshake, his mind racing. What was going on? The man introduced himself as Charles Walker, a private investigator. He explained that he had been hired by a wealthy family in the city who had been searching for someone. Someone they believed had been kidnapped. John's brow furrowed. "Kidnapped?" he repeated. Charles nodded. "We have reason to believe the woman you've recently hired may be involved in a series of high-profile abductions." John's heart skipped a beat. Grace. Impossible. She was just a cook. A kind, gentle cook who made him feel at home in a world that had always seemed cold. But as Charles spoke, everything John had been trying to ignore began to come crashing down. His trust in Grace, his belief in her innocence, began to shatter. The pieces of the puzzle that didn't make sense now seemed to fall into place. The secretive nights. The strange behavior. The way she always knew just the right thing to say, the way she fit into his world so perfectly. Could it be true? Before John could respond, his world felt like it was falling apart. Charles handed him a file. Inside, photos of missing persons, high-profile businessmen, politicians, and socialites, each one with a connection to Grace. Each one who had disappeared after crossing paths with her. And the worst part? Grace was the one pulling the strings. John sat frozen, staring at the file in his hands, his eyes scanning over the photographs. Each face seemed so familiar, people he had met at social gatherings, people he had seen on television. But now they were just names and faces attached to a nightmare. He couldn't believe what he was reading. This couldn't be real. "Are you telling me," John said, his voice trembling despite his best effort to stay composed, "that Grace is behind all of this?" Charles didn't respond right away, instead watching John with a cool, detached expression. "I know it's difficult to believe. But the evidence is clear. Grace Thomas has been involved in a string of kidnappings, targeting the wealthiest men in this city. She gains their trust, gets close to them, and then disappears. The families pay ransom, but by then, it's too late." John's mind raced, each word of the investigator's explanation hitting him like a blow to the chest. Grace, the woman he had trusted, who had brought warmth into his home, who had made him feel things he hadn't felt in years, was not who she appeared to be. She was a criminal. A mastermind. How? John's voice cracked. How could I not have seen it? "People like her are good at hiding their true selves," Charles said, his tone almost pitying. "They wear masks, and they play their roles well. But the truth always comes out. You see, Grace isn't just a cook. She's much more dangerous than that." John swallowed hard, the weight of the file in his hands unbearable. He felt sick, betrayed, and more than anything, confused. How could he have fallen in love with someone capable of such horrors? How could someone so kind, so gentle, turn out to be a monster? "I need to see her," John said, standing up abruptly. His legs were unsteady, his heart hammering in his chest. "I need to confront her. Now." Charles stood as well, his expression unreadable. "I understand, but be careful, Mr. Williams. Grace may look innocent, but she's dangerous. You don't know what she's capable of." John nodded absent-mindedly, already heading toward the door. "I don't care. I need to hear it from her. I need to know if it's true." As he walked down the hallway, his thoughts were a whirlwind of disbelief and rage. He had never felt more lost. He thought he knew who Grace was, but the woman he loved, trusted, was a complete stranger. When John reached the kitchen, he found Grace standing by the stove, her back to him as she stirred a pot. She was humming softly, as she always did, the melody soothing in its simplicity. The smell of her cooking, which had once been a source of comfort, now felt suffocating. "Grace," John said, his voice low but forceful. She turned to face him, her expression serene, almost too serene. "Yes, Mr. Williams," she replied, her voice sweet as ever, but John could hear the faint tremor in her words. She knew something was wrong. John didn't waste time with pleasantries. "What's going on, Grace? What is all this? Are you behind these kidnappings? Are you using me?" Grace's eyes widened for the briefest moment, but then her mask of calm returned. She took a step toward him, her face softening with an almost mournful look. "John, I didn't want you to find out like this. But yes, I'm involved. I've done things I'm not proud of. Things I can never take back." John recoiled, his mind reeling. He wanted to shout, to demand answers, but instead, he felt a cold emptiness settle in his chest. "Why, Grace? Why would you do this? I trusted you. I gave you everything. And this was all a lie. I never meant to hurt you," Grace said, her voice trembling now. She stepped closer to him, her hand reaching out, but John pulled back, his heart a battleground between love and betrayal. "When I first met you, I never planned on getting close. But you were different. You were kind to me. And for the first time in my life, I felt safe. Loved." John felt a sharp pang in his chest. He knew she was telling the truth in her own twisted way. She had fallen for him, just as he had fallen for her. But that didn't excuse the pain she had caused. "Then why didn't you stop?" John asked, his voice breaking. "Why didn't you walk away?" "I couldn't," Grace whispered. "I've been running this operation for years. I've built it from the ground up. Leaving now would mean destroying everything I've worked for. But more than that, I didn't want to lose you." John looked at her, his eyes searching hers, looking for any hint of the woman he had once trusted. The woman he had loved. But all he saw was a stranger. A woman who had been playing him all along. "Grace," he said, his voice cold now. "I don't know who you are anymore. I thought you were different, but now I see that you've been using me. For what? For money. For power. I can't be a part of this." Grace's face fell, the weight of his words crushing her. "I'm sorry, John," she whispered. "I never meant for it to go this far. But you have to understand. I've done terrible things to protect the people I love. And I'll do whatever it takes to keep them safe." The silence between them was suffocating. John couldn't breathe. He felt the walls of his world crumbling around him. The woman he had trusted, the woman he had let into his life, was a criminal. A liar. A kidnapper. "I can't be a part of this anymore, Grace," John said, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "You have to leave." Grace nodded slowly, tears welling up in her eyes. "I understand," she whispered, her voice broken. "I'm sorry. I never wanted to hurt you." And with that, she turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows of the mansion that had once felt like a home. Grace left the room in silence, her footsteps echoing in the emptiness of the vast mansion. John stood frozen in the kitchen, his heart pounding in his chest, as if the world around him was crumbling to dust. The weight of her confession, of everything he thought he knew, hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. But it wasn't the storm that came. It was the silence. A deafening, soul-crushing silence. John's hands shook as he gripped the edge of the countertop, trying to steady himself. His mind was in chaos, too many questions, too many unanswered pieces to the puzzle that now seemed to stretch endlessly in front of him. Grace was a criminal, but she was also the woman he loved. How could he reconcile the two? He had to make a choice. He couldn't stay in this state of disbelief forever. Turning away from the kitchen, he walked back into the study, his thoughts racing. What now? What was he supposed to do? Grace had left him, yes, but what if she came back? What if she tried to explain herself again? John's phone buzzed on the desk, pulling him from his thoughts. It was a message from his assistant. "Mr. Williams, there's a situation you need to address immediately. Please call when you get this." John's stomach tightened. The urgency in the message was clear, something was happening. He grabbed the phone and called his assistant back. "Hello, Mr. Williams?" The voice on the other end was frantic. "It's about Grace. The police are here." The words felt like a punch to his gut. "What do you mean, the police are here?" "They're looking for her. They know she's been involved in the kidnappings, and they believe she's planning something big. They want you to cooperate, sir. They think she might be in the area." John's heart skipped a beat. She was here. She hadn't left. "No," John said, his voice almost a whisper. "I need to see her. Mr. Williams, please." "You have to be careful," his assistant urged. "This is bigger than you think." John hung up without responding, the weight of his decision pressing down on him. He couldn't let the police take her, not without answers. Not until he had heard everything from Grace herself. He rushed to the door, but just as he reached the hallway, a sharp knock echoed from the front door. His pulse quickened. It was happening, she was here. He opened the door, his eyes scanning the surroundings, but there was no one. He stepped out onto the porch, his heart racing, searching the shadows. And then he saw her. Grace, standing at the gate, her eyes wide with fear. She looked different. There was no longer any trace of the calm, collected woman who had worked in his kitchen. Her face was pale, her expression lost. She didn't say a word as she met his gaze. For a moment, everything was still, just the two of them, standing at the edge of everything they had known. The wind picked up, rustling the trees around them, but it couldn't break the silence. "Grace," John said, his voice breaking as he stepped forward. "What's going on? Why didn't you leave?" Grace's voice trembled when she spoke. "I can't leave, John. They'll find me. I've made too many enemies. It's too late." John's heart sank. He stepped closer, reaching out to her, but she stepped back, shaking her head. "You don't understand. You don't know what they'll do to you if you're seen with me. They'll use you against me. You'll be in danger, too." "I don't care about that," John said urgently, his hand outstretched. "I care about you. We can figure this out together." "We." A sharp noise interrupted him, footsteps. The sound of sirens in the distance. Grace's eyes widened, and panic surged in her chest. "John, they're coming. You have to go inside. You have to leave now, or they'll." Before she could finish, the flashing red lights of police cars appeared on the street, casting long shadows down the quiet road. Grace's eyes locked onto John's one final time, her face filled with regret and sorrow. "I'm sorry, John. I never wanted you to get hurt." John felt his chest tighten. His mind was in chaos, torn between the love he felt for her and the weight of the truth he had just learned. But before he could say another word, Grace turned and fled into the darkness, disappearing into the night. John stood there for a moment, the sound of the approaching sirens growing louder. The decision was no longer his to make. He could run after her, chase her down, but it would only bring more danger to both of them. The love he had once felt now felt like a distant memory, a dream he couldn't hold on to. By the time the police reached the gate, John had retreated into the house. His hands were trembling, his mind reeling with everything that had just transpired. The door to the mansion swung open, and two officers entered, their eyes scanning the room, settling on John. "Mr. Williams," one of them began, his tone professional but heavy with the knowledge of what had just occurred. "We know you're close to Miss Thomas. We need your full cooperation in locating her. She's wanted for multiple abductions. We have reason to believe she's here. We also have reason to believe she's planning another kidnapping." John stared at them, his chest tight. This was it. The woman he had loved, the woman he had trusted, was a fugitive, a criminal, and there was nothing he could do to protect her anymore. "I don't know where she is," he said quietly, his voice hollow. "I don't know." The officers exchanged a look, their faces unreadable. "If you do hear from her, Mr. Williams, please let us know immediately." John nodded, his eyes vacant. He couldn't say anything more. He couldn't betray Grace, but he also couldn't lie to the police. He couldn't keep running from the truth. As the officers left, John collapsed onto the sofa, his mind numb. Grace was gone. And with her went the future he had imagined. The future he had once believed in. The next few days felt like a blur. Time moved differently now, slower, heavier, like every second dragged him deeper into the abyss. John couldn't escape the image of Grace running into the night, the desperation in her eyes, the way she had begged him to stay away. Her words echoed in his mind, "You'll be in danger, too." But now, as he sat alone in the silence of his mansion, the weight of everything that had happened settled in. His house, which had once felt like a refuge, now felt like a cage. The walls seemed to close in, suffocating him with the truth he couldn't ignore. The truth that Grace was not just a cook, she was a criminal, a kidnapper. The woman he had loved had been playing him all along. Yet, despite the betrayal, despite the fear, John couldn't help but feel the pull of his emotions. He loved her. Even now, despite everything, he still loved her. Was that foolish? Dangerous? Yes. But it was the truth. The police had come and gone, and there was nothing left to do but wait. The phone calls, the text messages, the endless interviews with detectives, they were all a blur. They wanted answers he didn't have. They wanted to know where Grace was, what her plans were, and who else was involved. But John didn't know any of it. Grace had kept everything from him, and now, it seemed, the life he had built was crumbling around him. His thoughts were interrupted by the ringing of his phone. It was a call from his assistant, Mark. "Mr. Williams, we have a problem." John's stomach churned at the urgency in Mark's voice. "What is it?" "It's about Grace," Mark said, his voice tight with worry. "We've received information that she's planning something big. A major ransom, sir. The police believe she's gone underground, but she's not done. They're preparing for another kidnapping." John's blood ran cold. He had hoped that with Grace gone, the nightmare would end. But now, it seemed, she was deeper in this world than he had ever imagined. "I need to find her," John said, his voice firm despite the confusion and fear that clouded his mind. "I don't care about the police, Mark. I need to know the truth. If she's planning something, I need to stop it." Mark was silent for a moment before responding, his voice heavy with hesitation. "Mr. Williams, I know you care about her. But you need to understand that this is bigger than you. She's not the woman you thought she was. She's dangerous." "I don't care," John snapped, the words coming out harsher than he intended. "I need to find her. I won't let her go down like this. She's not a criminal. There has to be another way." "Mr. Williams, please," Mark said, his voice pleading. "You're risking everything. The authorities are already involved, and if they find out you're trying to help her." "I don't care about the authorities. I care about her," John interrupted, his mind made up. "Tell me what I need to do." There was a long pause, and for a moment, John wondered if Mark had hung up. But then Mark spoke again, his voice grim. "I'll find out where she's hiding. But you have to be prepared. This isn't just about you and her anymore. It's about everyone she's hurt." John clenched his jaw, staring out the window into the night. It was too late to turn back now. He couldn't just sit by and wait for the police to handle this. He had to find Grace. He had to make sure she was safe, no matter what it took. Later that night, John received a message from an unknown number. The text was short, simple, and left him with more questions than answers. "If you want to see her again, you'll need to make a choice. Come to the old warehouse by the docks. Midnight." John's pulse quickened. This was it. The moment he had been dreading. He didn't know if this was a trap or if it was Grace reaching out to him, but he couldn't wait any longer. He had to know. Ignoring the warnings from his assistant, ignoring the voice in his head that told him to walk away, John grabbed his keys and left the mansion, the cold night air biting at his skin as he headed toward the docks. The old warehouse stood like a ghost in the dark, its windows broken and its steel doors rusted from years of abandonment. The faint hum of the city was a distant memory here. It was quiet, too quiet. The docks were empty, the moon casting an eerie glow on the water. John parked his car far away, his heart hammering in his chest. He didn't know what he was walking into. Was this a trap? A chance to finally confront Grace and get the answers he so desperately needed. As he approached the entrance to the warehouse, he spotted a figure standing in the shadows. It was Grace. She looked different, somehow darker, more desperate. Her once perfect hair was now tangled, her clothes torn and worn. But it was her eyes that gave her away. They were filled with something John had never seen before: fear. "Grace," John called softly, his voice hoarse with emotion. "What's happening? Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you let me help you?" Grace turned slowly, her gaze meeting his for the first time in days. "John, you shouldn't be here," she whispered. "You're in danger. They know about you. You shouldn't have come." "I don't care about the danger," John said, stepping closer. "I care about you. I want to help you." Grace shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "It's too late for me. It was always too late." John reached for her, his hands trembling as he took her by the shoulders. "Grace, we can fix this. You don't have to run anymore. You don't have to do this." But before she could respond, there was a sharp sound behind them, a car door slamming, footsteps echoing on the pavement. Grace's eyes widened, her body stiffening in fear. "They're here," she whispered. "You have to go, John. They're coming." John turned, his eyes scanning the darkness. He saw two men emerging from the shadows, their faces masked. One of them was holding something that glinted in the dim light. A gun. "You need to leave now," Grace said urgently, pushing John away. "This is your last chance." But John didn't move. He couldn't. Not when he was so close to finding the answers. The men took another step forward, their intentions clear. Grace was right, this was the end. For both of them. The men moved closer, their heavy footsteps echoing off the cold concrete floor of the warehouse. John's heart raced as he stood his ground, refusing to back down. He wouldn't leave Grace now, not when she needed him the most. But the presence of these masked figures, their intent written in their posture, was enough to freeze the air around them. "Grace," John said, his voice steady despite the pounding in his chest, "you don't have to do this. Please, let me help you. You're not alone anymore." Grace stepped back, her face a mixture of fear and desperation, but also relief. For a fleeting moment, it seemed like she was going to give in, to let herself be saved. But then she shook her head, her eyes darkening with a sadness that cut deeper than any physical wound. "It's too late for me, John. It's always been too late." Her voice was barely a whisper, but it carried a weight that made John's chest tighten. "You don't understand. This life I've chosen, it's all I know. I can't just walk away from it." Before John could respond, the taller of the two men spoke, his voice cold and authoritative. "Get out of the way, John." John glanced at him, then back at Grace, whose eyes were now pleading with him. He could see the pain in her expression, but it wasn't just pain, it was fear. Fear for him. Fear for herself. Fear that everything was falling apart. "Grace," he said softly, stepping forward, "this isn't who you are. I know it. You're better than this. Let me help you." But Grace's eyes flickered with uncertainty. She looked like she wanted to say something, but the words were trapped, the weight of everything too much for her to bear. The two men were nearly upon them now, and the tension in the air was unbearable. John could hear the steady click of one of the men's boots as he approached. A loud crack pierced the silence, and the warehouse lights flickered. John instinctively stepped in front of Grace, his heart pounding as he realized the sound hadn't been a gunshot, it was the sound of the door slamming open. For a brief, fleeting second, the world seemed to hold its breath. The entrance to the warehouse burst open, and in stepped a familiar face. Freeze. It was Detective Okoro, the same officer who had questioned John earlier, the one who had been involved in the investigation. He stood there, gun raised, his face grim and determined. Behind him, two more officers entered, their weapons drawn and aimed directly at the men who had been closing in on them. "Let them go," Okoro commanded, his voice sharp. The masked men hesitated, eyes flicking from John to the officers and back. Grace stepped closer to John, her face still a mask of regret and fear. "Grace, what is this?" John demanded, his voice breaking through the chaos. "What have you gotten yourself into?" For a long moment, Grace didn't answer. The seconds dragged on, stretching into what felt like eternity. And then, slowly, she spoke, her voice trembling. I didn't want this life, John. I didn't want to hurt anyone. But I didn't have a choice. I was trapped. I've been running from this for so long, and now it's caught up with me. Her voice broke, and tears welled in her eyes. The woman who had been so strong, so calculating, was now breaking before him, vulnerable and defeated. Grace, you still have a choice, John said, his voice desperate but soft. He reached for her hand, his heart aching for her. Come with me. We can leave all of this behind. We can figure it out together. The men behind Grace were now moving toward the door, their hands raised in surrender. Detective Okoro motioned to his team to secure them, but all John could focus on was Grace, standing in front of him, the woman he had trusted with his heart. The woman he still loved, despite everything. I can't, John. I can't just leave. I can't run anymore, she whispered, her voice so small, so broken. I've hurt too many people. I don't deserve to be saved. Before John could respond, she took a step back, her eyes never leaving his. I'm sorry, she said quietly. For everything. Then, with one final glance, she turned and fled into the shadows of the warehouse. John called after her, his voice cracking with desperation. But Grace was already gone. The police took the two masked men into custody, and soon, Grace's entire operation was unraveled. John's life, which had once been filled with wealth and privilege, now felt like a distant memory. The mansion felt cold, devoid of the warmth Grace had brought with her. Despite everything, despite the betrayal, despite the pain, John couldn't shake the feeling that Grace hadn't really wanted any of this. The Grace he had known was still in there, somewhere, buried beneath the mistakes, the lies, and the guilt. But now, it was too late. Weeks passed, and the case against Grace was building. John continued to help the police with their investigation, despite his own emotional turmoil. The woman he had loved was gone, and no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't escape the feeling that he had failed her. One afternoon, as John was going through the files from the investigation, his phone rang. It was an unknown number. John hesitated before answering. Hello, John. It was Grace's voice. Weak. Faint. His heart stopped. Grace. Where are you? I'm sorry, she whispered. I didn't mean for it to end like this. I just wanted to protect you. John's breath caught in his throat. Grace, please. Where are you? We can fix this. I'll help you. I'm not the woman you think I am, John, Grace said, her voice strained. I'll be turning myself in. It's the only way. No, Grace, John said, his voice cracking. Don't do this. We'll figure something out. Please, just come home. But the line went silent. And for the first time, John felt a cold, final sense of closure. Grace was gone. The woman who had stolen his heart, the woman who had turned his world upside down, had made her choice. As he sat there, staring at the phone in his hand, John realized that sometimes, no matter how much love you give, some people have to choose their own path even if it means walking away from everything. And as for him, he would never forget her. The woman who had been everything and nothing at once. The woman who had shown him love, only to destroy it in the end. Thanks for watching. If this video interests you, feel free to subscribe, like and share.